thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWire TV interview. It's time to introduce James Blake, the Vice President of Global Cyber Resiliency at cybersecurity company Cohesity, formerly Veritas, which says it's the world's largest data protection provider and leader in AI-powered data security. James, you describe yourself as a veteran cybersecurity leader with 3 decades of strategic and operational experience from console to boardroom, and as an expert at the intersection of data management, AI, and cybersecurity. And it's great to have you here. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Alex. And veteran just means old, right? So.
Well, you've been in cybersecurity as long as I've I've been a journalist, so I'm getting old too. There we go. But look, thank you for taking the time. Now, let's start with Cohesity itself. At the time of this interview, the homepage says resilience heroes are everywhere, and there are impressive stats about customers having paid 0% ransomware, with one customer saying 99% less recovery time, another time saying 10 times faster ransomware recovery, with 13,000 plus global customers, 85 of the Fortune 100, 70% of the Global 500, 200 plus exabytes of data protected, and 2 times the R&D of the nearest competitor, amongst many other stats. So, how do you describe Cohesity and its mission and vision, not only for the rest of 2025, but well beyond?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, we do 3 things. So the first thing is we do traditional business continuity and disaster recovery, and that's our origins. If we go back over 10 years ago, people were moving to the cloud, hybrid, mixed workloads, and it was all about how do we recover those at speed in the event of a incident. And an incident back then was a flood, a fire, a misconfiguration, equipment failure, power loss. But obviously, the world has changed in the last 10 years. And 2016, with the emergence of ransomware, the primary reason for outages these days are cyber attacks, either nation-state wiper attacks or ransomware. And so obviously, when that started to happen, our organization started to look at how can we extend those capabilities for recovery to not just recover, but handle the incident response components that are essential in a cyber attack. So the containment of the exfiltration of data and the spread of the ransomware. How can we handle the eradication of those threats and attack surface before you recover? So that's the area of the business that I kind of look after, which is the cyber resilience aspects. And then obviously, once you've backing all your data up to a single location and it's going into a platform which is normalizing it and holding it in a high performance secured area, AI becomes much easier to do. So rather than taking the models out and diasporing your data all over the organization where you can't control it, we've looked at, we're already holding your data. So how can you do AI securely and manage that data much more effectively? And that's our 3rd pillar. So we have traditional BCDR, we have the cyber resiliency aspects, and then we have how do you do AI put it in performant way while your data remains securely. So that's kind of our 3 main components.
Sure. And look, we're going to talk more about AI shortly, but before we get into some alarming Australian and global cybercrime stats, I mean, you just did speak about resiliency and explained a little bit about your job. And look, the definition of resiliency should be obvious, but what's your more nuanced way of defining it, and more information about your role as the Vice President of Global Cyber Resiliency?
Well, effectively, it depends which vendor you're talking to, it seems, what resiliency means. And it usually means their product, right? Which I find incredibly frustrating because I've only been working for vendors for about 5 years. Prior to that, I've been, on the other side of the table, consuming vendors' products and things like that. And I think the most important thing is the cyber resiliency isn't something you buy. It is an emergent property by, yes, having the right technology, but applying it in the right place with a team that understands their, roles in a shared responsibility model. So it's people, process, and technology, and it's an emergent property that just happens by doing those right things. And I think the unfortunate thing is people try and shortcut it by just buying a bit of tech or hiring more people, and you tend to find that not actually very resilient, right? And I'll talk some more about that when I talk about my role. But the other thing is there's a difference between cyber security and cyber resiliency. If I go back 10 years ago, every product was promising to be a silver bullet that stops all attacks. We live in a very different world now. A third of the ransomware attacks we see are coming in through vulnerabilities which are being weaponized in a day. How many organizations can patch in a day? No one, right? So we're coming to a stage where incidents are inevitable. And so we need to move from this mythology that we can build moats and walls that protect us against adversaries, because they just build better boats and better ladders, right? And they always get over our security. Now we need hygiene. We need to get rid of most of those attacks through proper protective and detective controls. But organizations are realizing that you need resilience. You need the ability to withstand and minimize the impact of these incidents because they're inevitable. And the irony is a lot of that is being driven down by boards and senior executives to the CISO, because the CISO has been promising, if you give me enough budget and enough headcount, I can stop everything. But they're seeing the consumers of all of these best of breed security products in the headlines getting hammered, and they're now coming to the CISO and going like, seriously, tell us where we are. And I think this is the reality of the conversations I've been having in the region, is people are realizing, right, like we need to go beyond pretending we can stop attacks, and we need to build this real resilience to be able to get back up to business as quick as possible. So that's what I see cyber resilience: people, process, technology, the ability to handle downtime in an efficient and as effective possible way to bring the business back up within the tolerances that the business has. Yeah. Now, in my role, what I do is I kind of look at two sides. So we have a cyber event response team. So we have a team that's on the phone with customers 24/7 as soon as they get hit. And we take them through that stressful situation of having a ransomware or wiper attack and help them during that, because it's probably the first time they've seen that, but not the first time it is for us, because we've seen it hundreds of times. And the thing is, though, for customers to be able to handle those incidents in the best possible way, preparation is the most important thing. That is the most critical thing in cyber resilience. So I lead a consulting team globally that are going into customers, baselining where they are, looking at their constraints in building cyber resiliency, headcount, politics, resistance to change, executive sponsorship, and then helping them build and execute roadmaps to deliver cyber resiliency. So I'm not a technologist, I'm an ops person. I'm a people process transformation person. And that's kind of the major part of my role is helping customers before those incidents, making sure that when they happen, they're able to get back as quick and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, you're the general surveying the battlefield and directing the troops. You don't have to be on the front line knowing how to use the equipment to solve the problem. But also you were mentioning the boards and the directors. And I don't know what the case is overseas, but in Australia there's like a push to make some of these directors personally liable for not having ensured that their assets, their IP and their cybersecurity is up to scratch, because obviously, you have a major breach and your customer records are out there, and if the director isn't made responsible, then it's like, we'll blame the CISO and we'll sack them and hire another one. So it's good to see the responsibility being pushed upwards, because they're the ones who are meant to be the directors, directing the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure you report to the directors of Cohesity, who want to know that you're doing the right thing as well in what you do. Now, I don't know if you want to comment on that before we move on, but I mean, are you seeing that sort of thing happening in other countries as well, where the boards are being held responsible as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the legislation that's come around globally, I mean, there's two elements to it, really. So if we look at, for instance, GDPR in Europe, right, all about privacy, protecting the data, making sure that it's not exfiltrated out of the organization. But then we're also seeing operational resiliency regulations, which is all about keeping systems up. So it's not just about protecting the data, it's about making those incident response and recovery processes as efficient as possible. So we've seen things like the Prudential Regulatory Authority in the UK, Bank of England, and also the Digital Operational Resiliency Act for banking in Europe, right? So both of those have been driving that. But then we've also seen things like NIS2, which is the Network and Information Security Act, which are for all critical national infrastructure. So we're starting to see that a lot. But one thing I took away from yesterday, so we ran a workshop, took, kind of 25 of the largest organizations in Australia through a simulated ransomware attack. And it was a big eye opener where I was like, well, if you pay the ransom, you do know you're going to prison, don't you? And they were like, no, people just were not aware of this. So an awful lot of the ransomware operators are sanctioned, right? So there's government sanctions against them. In Australia, it's 10 years in prison. Good news is if you come to the UK, you're only getting 7. But if you go to the US and you pay a sanctioned entity, it's 30 years in prison for the CEO of that organization, right? And people are just like, oh, I got cyber insurance, got it in my back pocket, I'm just going to pay them. And you're like, are you even checking to see if they're on a sanctions list? And the Office of Foreign Asset Control in America state on their website, being a victim of a sophisticated cyber attack is not an excuse for paying a sanctioned entity. Build resilience. They are telling you to build resilience, and they'll say we will not accept it as an excuse. Like, that the only way to recover my company is to pay the ransom. You will go to prison. And I think that is there's a lot of focus on getting people to actually take responsibility for this area of their business.
And we've also seen the case where companies have paid the ransom, clearly unaware of the fact that they could go to prison, and the cyber criminals released the data anyway, so it was pointless.
Oh God, I mean, it's worse than that, right? I know we're on a short podcast, but if you think paying the ransom is going to solve your problems, right, it's the start of a whole new set of other problems, and we go through this in our simulations. So, for instance, a lot of the decryption keys are asymmetric, right? So they're linked to the MAC address of the machine. If your CMDB is encrypted, how do you know what the decryption key is? If your voice over IP and email is down, how do you even distribute those keys? Are you going to phone someone up and read a 256-bit key to them over the phone? And even if you do, how do you understand which person has which key? Have you got a contact list of all the people to give keys to? Yeah. Have you got 1.5 million, 10 million in cryptocurrency lying around? No. And know your customer with the crypto exchange means there's going to be a 5-day delay in getting that amount of money. And then, encryptors are built for speed, not integrity. So you're probably only going to get 84% of your data back. And what's lost? The SharePoint server of pictures of marketing teams' dogs, or your mission critical data? You're not in charge of it. So, taking people, a lot of people do these tabletop exercises, which are kind of driven by people that have never had ransomware attacks. And we see hundreds of these attacks, there's several a month. And so we're trying to really get to the bottoms, the realities and the human impacts of these attacks and take people through them. So, that whole thing about paying the ransom, just build resilience. It's not easy, but build resilience.
Yeah, it's like the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Ounce of prevention and preparation is worth a pound of cure. That old, learning is truer than ever today.
It's worth 15 tons. It's far more extrapolation than that, because I deal with incidents in customers that haven't prepared and ones in customers, and it's chalk and cheese, right? It's just a world of difference. That more preparedness you can do, the slicker and more efficient and the better experience for your customers, your business chain partners, and everything else. It's all about preparedness. Cyber resilience is all about what you do up front, because you can't retrofit it during an incident, right? The damage is already done.
We saw it on the front of your website. One customer says 99% less recovery time, another saying 10 times faster ransomware recovery, and obviously those speak for themselves. Now, you're visiting Australia to see, hear from and advise your customers in retail. You just talked about the exercise you did yesterday, taking 25 major customers through a ransomware attack and what the implications are. And I've got to say, I'm sure I've read it somewhere that paying the ransom could land you in jail, but that didn't, that was like a surprise to me. Even though I've been reporting on cybersecurity, it's like, you forget that, and that's a pretty amazing thing. So you're advising customers in retail and travel, healthcare, education, etc. And also, you must be here to see your staff. And you have brought some alarming Australian and global cybersecurity stats, things like cybercrime costing the Australian economy $42 billion annually, our increasing nature as a hotspot for ransomware attacks, which I've actually heard for years, but clearly it's growing, not diminishing. And, where the rising appeal as a target for cyber criminals. But also, you have some unreleased Cohesity data revealing a critical gap. So one of those is that many Australian businesses lack confidence in their cyber resilience strategies, with most still relying on manual detection and approval processes to respond to attacks. And we've seen things like the scattered spider and its implication on Australian businesses, and things like 40% of organisations detecting threats using internal tools, yet still require manual sign-off to respond, which is like crazy, while organisations globally are more likely to have automated direction and verifications in place, presumably using your software. And also things like 54% of organisations saying their biggest lesson from recent attacks was the need for better automation to improve detection, response and recovery. So let's hear more from you about that critical gap that has come from your unreleased data.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that, right? So It looks like, a handful of statistics, but if you look at what that means, right, it's very broad. So if we take automation, for instance, one of the reasons why a lot of organizations struggle to automate is they have no process to automate, right? So everything is handled ad hoc every time, every person handles it in a very different way. And that makes it very difficult to drive continual improvement, right? Because you can't measure a person, a process. If there's no consistency in process, it's very hard to automate. So I think the first thing is build process, right? Build process. And when you build a process, you don't want it to be a train line, you want it to be a roadway. And what I mean by that is your workflows, your playbooks need to cater for the fact that an adversary is constantly changing and adapting their behavior. So you need the skills in your staff and also the playbooks to give them the framework of what to do, but it's not too constraining. Otherwise, when you see an adaptation in adversary behavior, you're like a deer in headlights and no one knows what to do. So building the right level of process for the current maturity of your organization, and their processes will get better over time. So don't try and boil the ocean. And we see customers really struggling to do that. They build a Prince2 map of 13,000 work items that need to be done. And by the time they deliver the final project, the way you deliver IT has moved on and the way the adversary attacks you has moved on. So much more practical to look at your weakest areas of performance, right? Because cyber resiliency is a chain of interlocking aspects of people, process and technology. And your weakest link is the one that always turns you down. So rather than focusing on one area, getting it to like a CMMA level 5, look at the things that are zeros, look at the things that are 1, take practical steps to just improve those 1 or 2 areas. And the dividends you get and the speed in which you get that performance is great, right? So that's the first thing I'll say about automation is you've got to start with building some form of operational capability and process. And then once you've got that process, you can then automate that process, right? If you collect metrics about the step of your incident response that takes the longest time, you get the greatest benefit by automating that one thing rather than trying to automate the whole process end to end. And that's our approach for helping our customers using our automation capability called Cyber Recovery Agent. We focus on the areas that are taking the greatest effort, greatest time first, rather than trying to automate the whole thing end to end. And then we'll get them there, but you do it in a pragmatic way. I think the other thing that you mentioned there is it's about the challenges that organizations are having, just dealing with all of the complexities that are involved in the different people that have to be involved in incident response. In business continuity and disaster recovery, it used to be IT managed it end to end, but the root causes of BCDR are like one hand, weather, fire, misconfiguration, power loss, equipment failure. We could find that out in a matter of minutes, right? Data center's dark, probably power loss. If flames are licking your face, it's probably a fire, right? Your feet are wet, it's a flood. And we could root cause instant mass restore. Not like that in a cyber attack. 14 different stages of attacks, 300 different attack techniques they can use. They can do them in any order in an iterative way. They can not even be using any malware at all, and they could be living off the land, very difficult to detect. Or they could be using identity-based attacks, targeting vulnerabilities. All of it's like infinitely more complex than a normal BCDR incident. Yet we see a lot of customers where their approach starts at recovery, not at the stages you need to do in all of the best practice frameworks. Before you can recover, you have to eradicate the threats and attack surface. To do that, you need to understand how the attack happened and investigate it. You mentioned contacting the CIO and asking for permission, very much like the Russian model of military, where you have to go up to a general and all the way back. And by the time you've got authorization, you're already dead or the enemy's moved on. You need to have your analysts able to have high confidence, high fidelity signals to contain the incident. Because the 10 minutes speaking to your CIO is the difference between 5 machines being encrypted and 15,000, right? So to do that containment, you need those high quality signals. And to be able to even start doing all of this, you need communication systems up. You need authentication systems up in a trusted state. So that prepare, investigate, contain, eradicate, then recover is what you need to do. But sometimes IT start with recover, don't even talk to the security team, and you end up with this very fragmented shared responsibility model with gaps being missed, and they recover and bring back the attack and just get attacked again and again and again and again. So, well-established frameworks exist to do that. And my job is to help customers align with those best practices, just so happens with Cohesity solutions.
Well, look, James, all of that is quite fascinating. And I mean, it just shows the sophistication not only of the bad guys, but of the responses that companies need to implement, and that the cybersecurity companies like yourselves are putting together to, really turbocharge the responsiveness and the ability to recover quickly. There's no point, it's like in the old days, you would make a backup of everything, and then when you had some hard disk crash, you would reach for your backup and you found out that, because there was no SSDs back then, that had also fallen and broken, or it hadn't backed up for the last 6 months, or it had been kicked to the floor by one of the kids and put back on top. No one ever tested their backups to see if they could be recovered. They were just sort of safe in the knowledge, oh yeah, I've got a backup. But when it came to the crunch, there was this new set of problems. So I mean, you've explained that extremely well in the modern context. So why is Australia facing a surge in cyber threats? And why are critical sectors like transport and education increasingly in the crosshairs?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons, right? So it is a global phenomenon, right? So ransomware is not targeted to any specific reason. Historically, what we've seen in Australia is a big focus on data exfiltration extortion. So you have been reasonably lucky compared with the US and UK, for instance, and also Germany and France, in the fact that most of your incidents have been thefts of data being held to ransom and then leaked. Obviously, there's multiple different extortion techniques that adversaries use, but so far there has not been a large focus on encrypting that data and putting it beyond use. However, what we're seeing in research that's come out not from ourselves, but from various other research partners, is the payment of ransoms for data exfiltration is going down. And the major reason is the same data that's being leaked about your customers has already been leaked by another one of your, peer organisations somewhere else in Australia. So the actual impacts of those data leaks are reducing as more and more citizens' data of Australia becomes available in the public domain. But what we're not seeing is the decrease in payment being put beyond use, right? So I am anticipating, putting my threat intelligence hat on, that you are going to see an increase in destructive data attacks within the ANZ region over the next couple of years. And that also reflects scattered spider. You mentioned them earlier. If you look at what they're doing in terms of the geographies they're targeting in the vertical markets, they originally started with hotels in the US, and then they switched to retailers in the UK. Completely different vertical, completely different geographic area, and then switched back to insurance companies in the US. And now they've hit Jaguar Land Rover in the UK, a vehicle manufacturer, right, with destructive ransomware. So I would say, looking at the past is not a good prediction for what will happen in terms of a threat model in the future. So I'd be very, very worried as an Australian organisation, not just about data exfiltration, but about my ability to deliver products and services. And if we look at the geopolitical situation in the region, we know there is a nation state which is pre-positioning in critical national infrastructure, which is not its normal activity. Its normal activity is espionage based. So it gets in, you see data exfiltration over an extended period of time. They've changed the organizations they are targeting and are just sitting in critical national infrastructure, logistics, transport, utilities, telcos, banking. And we're all fully expecting, some kind of kinetic attack that will be linked to turning the lights off with all of the allies of the regional partner. So, people like Volt Typhoon, a threat actor there, very, very worrying globally, but especially so in this region.
Yeah, it reminds me that past is not prologue anymore, and all those financial disclaimers there, past performance is not indicative of future success. Well, it's exactly the same. I mean, with the sophistication and wiliness of these, threat actors, like you said, positioning themselves to, when they do attack, to just have this widespread attack that attacks so many different areas. I mean, they can take us down without sending a single missile or a soldier and cause chaos. And then if they want to back it up with strikes and with troops, how are we going to respond? And that's a deeper discussion for another time and presumably a different company. Now, one of the things that I've been hearing about for the last decade or so with this whole digital transformation thing is that, you've got all these silos in business, and if you do digital transformation, you're able to break these silos down and get all the information together. And, over the past year or so, I've been going to these various conferences where every company's got, we've got AI agents, agentic AI, it's going to help break down all the silos. And I've been saying to some of these companies, hang on, didn't we already break the silos down with digital transformation? Are you telling me the silos are still there? And I mean, the question is for you. I mean, clearly those silos are still there. For whatever. I mean, the new silos or the old silos that haven't been fully digitally transformed yet. Because digital transformation is this journey of continuous improvement, and companies can be halfway through something and then things change and they have to abandon that and start transforming again. So, how are silos within businesses slowing recovery? And what is the impact? I guess it's obvious in a way, but what is the impact this has on both the business and the customer?
Yeah, I think the best answer to that is going a step back, right? And before we talk about silos, talk about transformation, right? And the traditional IT cycles that we have every 7 years, right? We went mainframe, client server, and then we went cloud, and then we went...
Now it's AI.
Yeah. Now it's AI. Yeah, and as as an ex-army officer, right, the one thing I learned, Helmut von Moltke, great German general, No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Yeah,
right?
it's like no one. What's the term? Everyone's got a different opinion once they've been punched in the face.
Exactly. Mike Tyson's version is the one I like. No plan survives being punched in the mouth.
That's
right?
what I was
And
thinking.
the reality, yeah, and the reality is, I used to run global cyber transformation for one of the largest bank in the Western Hemisphere. So a third of a million employees, 45 million IT assets, right? We joked that we weren't a bank, we were an IT company that handled money, right? But there, you, it's great. We say we're going to move to the cloud. Then there's the realities of moving to the cloud, right? The opportunity to move to the cloud is to completely re-engineer all of your applications to be cloud first. What did most organizations do? They lifted and shifted their janky on-prem, not very well managed services into the cloud, and things didn't get better. Now they're repatriating a lot of that data. So what I tend to find is a lot of these things with like AI and things like that, they offer a lot of promise. And because things are just difficult, right? If you're a large organization with legacy tech, with staff that culturally don't like change, that are protective of their jobs, so like the old technology, not the current one, it's incredibly difficult to exert change on those organizations. So I think, technology offers us wonderful opportunities for the future, but sometimes it's very difficult to execute on what we need to do. We fall short. And I think a lot of people, that's why I'm a great fan, is pragmatic continual improvement rather than setting your goalpost over the horizon and then making a plan when you upturn rocks and there's a horror story underneath them and you have to rebalance this waterfall prince to massive critical path. It's just like, no, do something better every day. Rinse and repeat. And that's how you get over the horizon, right? In a way that's constantly adapting to the way IT, what you find out in the business is there. So, going back to the core question, I think we need to look at where we want to be, but then be really realistic about where we are now, right? But baby's ugly. If it's ugly, call it ugly, because then you're starting on a truthful baseline, and then you can move forward. And that's, we spend a large amount of time assessing the maturity across 120 different areas of cyber resiliency against the best practice frameworks that exist, the 7 response and recovery frameworks. And organizations are shocked at actually what their operational level of resilience is. And then we've seen other organizations get hit by ransomware. They get loads more budget, load more people. And then you go back and assess their maturity again, and it's still as bad. They're just doing it with more people and more money, right? And more budget, more tools. So, focus on what makes the difference. I think that's the thing. And don't go over the horizon, go tomorrow, and then tomorrow again, and then tomorrow again. And they're the organizations I've seen that in very short periods of time have been able to improve the actual operational capability to handle incidents. So it's the same with all those technologies, AI, cloud, container, microservices, all of these things. That pragmatic approach is the one that delivers true value.
Yeah, two things. One, moving things to the cloud. I mean, then all of a sudden you've got this gap in between uploading it and downloading it. And it's only in recent, years that we've had bandwidth big enough and strong enough to be able to replicate, or come close to replicating the speed of having stuff in the building on premise. Ethernet can be much faster than your broadband connection. And then secondly, perfection is a laudable goal. Everybody wants perfection. But, to go from here to leap all the way to there and to do that, consistently is a difficult thing. Consistency in the small actions every day that builds and builds and builds and builds until you do reach something approaching perfection is, as you were describing, a much smarter way of going about things, because those little smaller goals, eating the elephant in the room in bites at a time as opposed to trying to swallow the whole thing, well, that's just common sense, except it's not so common, and we have to be woken up to don't have that, have the amazing audacious goal, but what are all the smaller goals that are going to get us to that point, reach that point? So I definitely agree with what you're saying there, James.
Yeah, and prioritization. That's the other thing. So you would not believe the amount of organizations that I'm going in to speak to and their top concern is post-quantum cryptography,
Yeah.
right? And they want to apply it across all their data sets, right, in the organization. I'm like, oh, half of your data sets aren't even important. And if they're exposed in 3 years, right, the data will no longer be relevant or regulated or anything else. Why are you trying to apply this across all your data?
Yeah.
Apart from focusing it on the regulated data, the critical data that's there, but they've just got this one size fits all brush that's going to have a huge delay in impacting across the business. But the most important thing is that's their top priority, yet their entire ransomware program is a
lacking.
complete dumpster fire. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Dumbfire.
which is the
Dumpster
greater
fire.
risk?
Yeah.
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 So
Well,
which is the greater risk? This theoretical future, we know it's coming. We know we're going to get enough qubits to be able to break it. But the immediate threat is ransomware that's here and now and hitting you, or nation state actors as wipers. Why are you focusing on this? Because it's sexy.
Yeah.
Quantum
It's
sexy.
the buzzword.
AI sexy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're focused on all this future stuff when the attackers are in your systems and environments right now, laying in wait to launch some attack, which could come this afternoon or tomorrow. And yeah, you're stuffing around with quantum, which exists, but like you said, years away. So yes. I mean, another great wake-up call. I'm sure you spoke about some of those scenarios with those 25 top Australian companies yesterday, just to wake them up. So on that note, and you must have spoken about this as well yesterday with these customers, but what are the most effective ways to recover securely from ransomware attacks? I mean, obviously, we're not going to go into huge detail, but backups have been targeted in the past too. So what else must businesses do to be resilient? Obviously, broadly speaking, because we can't cover it all in this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, very, very high level. If you look at the steps involved to go from zero to hero, right, they're largely well established, right? So the first thing is you need to understand what assets support your business, right, and the criticality of those assets, and you back those up. Because if you're not backing them up, you can't do anything else. And then we know, you just mentioned it, adversaries are targeting backups in every ransomware attack, right? Because there's various different mechanisms you use to protect that. So immutability, you write it, you can't delete it. Separation of duties. So even if you get a bribed or malicious insider member of staff, they can't conduct activities which are going to impact the availability of that data. Least privilege, right? Because backups are used for data exfiltration. Why do I need to discover and exfiltrate data from 1,000 servers when I can recover your critical data using your backup to one system and then exfil from there, right? People don't think about that as a attack model. So least privilege, right? Have the privileges you need for the recovery activities you need. And then strong authentication and things like that. So the next stage is protecting those backups, right? And then holding a vaulted version of that backup somewhere else, your traditional 3-2-1 backup, right? Then it goes beyond that to how do we make sure we're not recovering vulnerable systems, because a third of all ransomware is coming in through vulnerable vulnerabilities. And then how do we eliminate those artifacts of persistence in the attack? And these are not just like, ransomware is not a binary. It's not like antivirus where you remove one file and all of a sudden things are clean. They're changing configuration files. They are adding users. They're adding federated authentication providers. So even if you rotate all your passwords, they can still log in. Right? So all of these things need to be investigated, discovered, and eradicated in the clean image. And you do those things typically in what we call a clean room. So a clean room, isolated environment where you can do investigation without risk of reinfection and also eavesdropping from the adversary, and then you recover. And some of the recovery strategies these days, banks in the UK, potential regulatory authority, 24 hours. 24 hours, you can't even investigate the incident. So now there's a strategy towards not just being able to do volume-based recovery, investigation and cleaning, but also rebuilding systems to a trusted state. So known good config, known good install image, installed on a vaulted outside of your main tenant, your main kind of infrastructure, so it can't be targeted. And then you use that to do a rebuild. So whether you're mature infrastructure as code of Terraform, or you're less mature and use Ansible or Bash scripts, right? There's a sliding scale of maturity on this. And then the final thing is, once you've got that ability to investigate, conducting drills, right? Desktops are great, but they don't really allow you to evaluate people, process, and technology, right? It's a theoretical thing on a desktop, very high level. Get your penetration testers to attack a clone. You can use Cohesity to clone your production environment, mask the data so they're not dealing with real customer data, all the way from getting in to exfiltration to encryption. Now you're testing your detection, you're testing your incident response, your eradication, you're testing the relationship between IT and security, and you're building that muscle memory so when it happens, everyone knows exactly what to do and how to do it. And also you can take those measurements of what's letting people down. Do you need to mentor or train members of staff? Provide an automation. So conducting these continual drills allows that continual improvement, and that driving of efficiency and effectiveness is definitely something that we kind of espouse. Is don't try and become CMMI level 5 overnight. Just have this way of building an ability to conduct drills, minimum viable response capability, and just improve it all the time. And again, we've got several thousand customers. The ones that perform the best when they're hit are the ones that have gone through this process. So, back up everything you need to, protect that backup, make sure that you can investigate and eradicate the threats, and then run drills to continually improve your efficiency and effectiveness in it. So that's my advice to anyone that's looking to build resilience.
Well, I mean, that probably is part of the answer to this next question, which is what can government and industry do to close the current cyber resilience gap, of which what you were just saying is one big part?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the operational resiliency, and I fully expect this to go global. So the UK and EU, with the Prudential Regulatory Authority and DORA, started off by saying, look, security is not enough, right? The two areas they focused on really explicitly within both of those pieces of regulation are third-party risk management, and how many of us have seen attacks on large Australian companies that come in through service partners, right? Or third-party software that they're using. And the second thing is the incident response, right? And recovery. So there's a big focus now on making sure these banks and critical national infrastructure are covered by these regulations have good incident response. Because historically, we spent 85 to 95% of our budgets on those moats and walls, and very little on being able to handle the incidents. This mentality that we can stop all attacks. Yeah. And I think the operational resiliency acts that have come out have laid that bare. They're just like, you have to build an ability to have resilience through response and recovery, not just prevention and detection. And so I think that operational resiliency legislation is going to go global. We know the Monetary Authority of Singapore is looking at it. We know the US is looking at it. And Australia is very forward thinking. So the Australian Signals Directive, ASD, is at the forefront of the fight against ransomware and things like that. And I think you're going to see legislation very soon that's going to mandate, that level of resilience and response and recovery.
Now, with your stats showing that 45% of businesses admit their cyber resilience strategy requires improvement for today's threats and challenges, of which we've heard so much about, including a lot of the things that the Australian Signals Directorate is doing to try and warn and wake Australians up. I mean, we even have ads on TV from the government telling people to update your phones, update your software. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer, but I get teased by one of the people I do a radio show with that I'm always telling people to update. And, if only, the 1950s fridge that some people are using that their grandmother bought, it's still in the garage, keeping the beer cold. I mean, if our tech could be that reliable, but clearly we're well beyond that. So we now are living in a world of AI, which can undertake some of these drudgery tasks for us. So what is the role of AI and Gen AI in cybersecurity? And how is Cohesity working with AI to make that it do a lot of that drudgery work and improve our security out of sight?
Well, AI is always a double-edged sword, right? So it can be used by adversaries, it can be used by the defenders.
Yeah, I was going to say AI. I've heard that AI wants to be so friendly. It'll help a hacker by helping them with its answering of questions. It's like, AI isn't.
Yeah.
It's not very smart sometimes.
And at the same time, I mean, in my role, I put all of the leaks from the ransomware operators, right? So a lot of the ransomware operators are kind of fragmented. This is the thing about criminals. It's very difficult to keep a criminal enterprise together, and they kind of fragment and attack each other and leak each other's internal chat logs. You can load all of those into a large language model and then ask questions about adversary tactics, like what are they using, how do they target backups, how are they structured, what's their usual methodology for negotiation. So you can learn a lot about these generic trends. And we offer a complimentary 45-minute session with people to just talk about those trends. We don't talk about our products at all. We just talk about what we're seeing ransomware operators do.
Well, they're collaborating, right? And working together. I mean, there's a
nation state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honor among thieves, right?
Yeah. But we're also seeing nation states getting initial access, doing the eavesdropping that they normally do, and then handing the access over to ransomware operators. So then they encrypt everything, and all the evidence that you've ever been hit by a nation state is gone, and it's false flag. They can say that. We're also seeing people that work for government agencies taking the tools that they use to hack for their governments home, and then in the evenings running ransomware campaigns to earn a bit of money on the side. Right? We live in a very strange. But from an AI perspective, so AI is both enabling some of these attacks, right? But I think some vendors are over exaggerating, right? Like what's happening. And they're going, the sky is falling, because of course you buy our product, everything will be fine, right? But the reality is things like weaponization of vulnerabilities, right? That is happening in a day now. Microsoft has Patch Tuesday. They use AI-powered reverse engineering tools to find what the vulnerability is, even though it's unpublished, that patch patched. And then they're baking the exploit into their ransomware as a service platform. So now you've got thousands of affiliates that can attack you through that vulnerability within a day. Microsoft Patch Tuesday, exploit Wednesday. Can you patch in a day? No one can. So that's an effect of AI. Laws. So things like the phishing emails you get, and phishing is only about 14% of attack vectors at the moment that we see. So it's gone right down. But we used to say, look for bad English, look for, it's gone now, natural language processing. They can make it look like it's actually someone in the company by profiling what their emails look like from the emails they've stolen, right? So AI has kind of helped attackers, but likewise it's helped us. We have machine learning models that can detect anomalous deletions in encryption. We're continually building new models. So even when adversaries change behavior, we're able to detect these previously unseen attacks. So AI, double-edged sword, they're getting better at attacking, and we're a force multiplier to get more efficiency from those analysts and incident responders that you've got.
So James, look, I had so many more questions to ask you, and we've just simply run out of time. I mean, it's been fascinating to speak with you. So let me just ask you, and we must do this again, but what is your final message to the viewers and the readers?
I think the most important thing to realize is, find out where you are now. Like be truthful with yourself, understand your operational capability to bring your business back up and running, like understanding your assets, having those processes around incident response and recovery, IT and security working together, the right platforms that are in there. Just know where you are today, because that gives you your baseline. And that means as you improve cyber resiliency, you can prove it to the business as well, because you know where you are now and you can measure in the future. Right? So, and then be realistic about what's achievable. A lot of people panic. They think, we're much worse than everyone else. We don't want to discuss it. Having assessed over 770 of the largest companies in the world, their operational resiliency capabilities, I will tell you, I've seen much worse, right? I've seen much, 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 much worse. And these are large companies spending hundreds of millions on cybersecurity, but the actual operational capability is very, very low. So I think there's no shame in admitting where you are, because that is the first stage, like 12-stage program. If you don't know, you don't accept you need to change, then you can't make change, right? So I think that realistic view of where you are, and then you've got a goal, you've got a target, it's cyber resiliency, and then building a pragmatic plan that gets you there, that isn't trying to boil the ocean, that is right for the constraints of your organization, right? Be those cultural, political, money, headcount, legacy tech, right? That is the thing to do, and it's different for every company. That roadmap looks different depending on where you are, depending on what you're delivering, depending what your tech stack is and your structure. But you can't just buy a framework off the shelf and deliver it. You've really got to go through that yourself, and a multidisciplinary approach with all the different teams is the right way to go.
James Blake, Vice President of Global Cyber Resilience at Cohesity. Thank you very much for your time. I wish you the best for the rest of your time in Australia, and I look forward to speaking again.
Yeah, I hope so, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.